Canada's shameless, soft approach towards terrorists on full display in no less a venue than the country's national parliament. And it's back in focus just a couple of days after Prime Minister Modi had met with his Canadian counterpart, Justin Trudeau. On Tuesday, Canadian Parliament marked the one-year death anniversary of designated Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar by observing a shameful moment of silence in their parliament. A man designated as a terrorist by the biggest democracy in the world was given an honor for a 1-minute silence in Canada's parliament. The commemoration comes amidst simmering tensions between Canada and India since last year, especially after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged that the Indian government was involved in Nijjar's killing. There has been no proof of that extended even vicariously so far. In response to Canada's moment of silence, the Indian Consulate General in Vancouver announced a memorial service to honor the 329 people killed by Khalistani terrorists in the 1985 bombing of Air India flight Kanishka. Remember, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the chief of the Khalistan Tiger Force, a banned terrorist organization, was killed in Canada's Surrey, outside British Columbia's Gurudwara, on June the 18th last year. His name was on the list released by the Indian government with 40 other designated terrorists. Joining us live now, Daniel Boardman, senior correspondent with Canada's National Telegraph, Dr. Tara Karta, terrorism and security expert and former director of the National Security Council Secretariat, and Abhijit Iyer Mitra, senior research fellow with the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for your time. Daniel, quickly to you first. Things happening in Canada vis-a-vis Hardeep Singh Nijjar, don't really surprise people in India anymore. But this came as a bit of a particular shock. An honor ceremony, a moment's silence for a designated terrorist inside Canada's parliament. How do you explain this? How do you see it, Dan?
The explaining of this is it's completely par for the course for the Trudeau government. This is exactly what has been happening the last 9 years. Yes, it's a bit of an escalation, but let's not forget that this is a pattern of support for terrorism from the Trudeau or Trudeau-Jagmeet alliance. Since 2015, we have given $10.5 million to a convicted terrorist, Omar Khadr, who we knew planted IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. His father was one of the founders of Al-Qaeda. And instead of fighting him in court, because the Americans kept him awake at night with sleep deprivation in Guantanamo, because the Americans did it, we just decided to pay him $10.5 million of taxpayer money. Justin Trudeau also said in Parliament that returning ISIS fighters, members of ISIS, could be, quote, a powerful voice of de-radicalization. So the reason we needed to bring in ISIS members, returning ISIS members to Canada, is the ISIS members would de-radicalize the children. When this was criticized and conservatives said they did not want ISIS members in Canada, this was Islamophobia. So here we now have the ultimate extension of this, a moment of silence for a terrorist, a man whose own people come up as the leader of the Khalistan Tiger Force, which you've mentioned. I hope you show the logo of the Khalistan Tiger Force and how silly it is, because there's a lion in the middle because they're Khalistanis. And this crosses a line. So it's one thing if we wanted to say the principle here was we will defend a Canadian because a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and any Canadian, no matter what, okay. And we even pretend that the Indian government was 100% responsible. Yeah. This is not the response for Karima Baloch, actual human rights activist murdered by the ISI here. This was not the response to Mehdi Amin, a friend of mine who is an advocate for a free Iran, murdered likely by the IRGC here. Those two people can rot in hell for all we care. But a man who was, again, the leader of the Khalistan Tiger Force, ties to Pakistan, terrorist training camps. This is a man who we're going to observe a moment of silence for and promote and pop up and glorify. It's unacceptable. I'm fine with fighting for justice on his murder. You can justify that. You cannot prop him up as a paragon of Canadian virtue.
I understand what you're saying. Par for the course for the Trudeau government, but definitely an escalation and something that crosses the line. Dr. Tara Karta, how should the Indian government see this? Tensions between India and Canada have been simmering since last year. When India was blamed first by the Trudeau government. But this is an obvious, provocation. Daniel says it crosses a line. How do you see it?
Oh, absolutely. I would 100% agree with Daniel. I didn't know about the ISI aspect either. That is surreal. I don't know what else to say. But I think our embassy there is already, a High Commission there has already started in terms of having a memorial service for those who died in Air India crash, which I thought was a very good thing. But separately, just to look at this from a sort of standoff point of view, Trudeau and his partner, both the parties are at a 50-year low in terms of their popularity in Canada. So no wonder he's doing these things. Jagmeet Singh and Trudeau are both the worst performers. That is one. Number two is 54% of Canadians see inflation as a huge, huge problem. This guy needs some card up his sleeve to sort of flash around and say, we held silence for a terrorist. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
Dramatics and diversions, you're saying.
Considering that Canada is signatory to 13 UN resolutions on terrorism. 13 UN resolutions. They are signatory to that. How can you not act against Canada's own laws? Allows them, not just allows. Once you sign to a UN agreement, you're supposed to have the legislation on the ground, which allows that to be, to be predicated on the ground. He's got the law spirit. Why isn't he doing it?
But I'm just wondering. I'm wondering. There are all these political compulsions on the ground, like Daniel laid out, and I'll bring Abhijit in on this. There are all these hypocrisies as far as UN resolutions on terrorism, etc., are concerned. But at the end of the day, one wonders how India should respond to this. Abhijit, it's not like actions haven't been taken. There were Canadian diplomats who were thrown out of India. That sent out a message, but it clearly seems that this issue isn't over.
Thanks, Shiv. Look, it isn't over by a far margin because we need to be worried about the direction of Canadian politics per se, and not just Trudeau. If you listen to the complete statement that the speaker read out, the Conservatives were complicit in this minute of silence. This had been done after cross-party consultation. I would remind you that when Stephen Harper visited India when he was Prime Minister, there was an official boycott of him because he had been trying very hard to get the Khalistanis on board with the Conservative Party, and Pierre Poilievre continues that policy. If you look at Tim Uppal, who's his right-hand man, literally right-hand man, he sits on his right in Parliament, the fellow is an...
Okay, I think we've lost that link with Abhijit. What a pity. He was just making that point. I'll get back to him in just a bit. But if I could just pick up on that last point that Abhijit was making and come to you with that, Daniel, that this isn't just about Trudeau. The worrying aspect of it, for those looking at what's happening, is that this is, the entire political class in Parliament in Canada. Cross-party consultations needed to happen for this kind of ceremony to take place in Parliament for a designated terrorist.
Yeah, Abhijit's absolutely right about this. This is not just one party susceptible to foreign interference. It's every party. The Khalistanis have been incredibly effective at political infiltration. They won the Air India bombing, if you want to say it that way. There were no consequences put on them, and they only gained in political strength afterwards. There's a confluence of factors. You could say racism, that we didn't care about brown people, or the sort of woke racism the soft bigotry of low expectations, where we can't expect, Khalistanis not to blow up an airplane because of whatever. But it's very easy to infiltrate Canadian politics with some money and some crazies. Because we have a first past the post system, and we have sort of the MPs. It's not so much in the federal election when the Conservatives run against the Liberals and the NDP. The internal party election selections thing. Anyone can be disqualified for any reason. So we should be able to disqualify the terrorists, but we have so much money infiltrating it that through vote banks and all this different stuff, you give one radical Gurdwara in an area some poison. You give the people money to register for the party. You then bus them into votes. And, how many people vote in internal party elections in an MP riding? A couple hundred? So you pack one Gurdwara, you could pretty much select who's running for the party in that region, right? If you then get a Khalistani into the seat in the Conservative Party, Liberal Party, or NDP, right? Most people in that riding aren't voting Khalistan, not Khalistan. They don't care. They're voting red, blue, orange. So if you can hijack it at the the level of a selection, then you get your people in. And this is what the Khalistani has been incredibly effective at doing across all parties. And because they can morph and be conserved, taxes higher, taxes low. Yeah, taxes in Khalistan or no taxes in Khalistan. Like it's pretty. It's the most Canadians hear the first part and leave out the second part. So yes, it's been very, very problematic. Abhijit rightly brings up Tim Uppal, who has some problems with statements he's been making recently.
I'll let Abhijit complete his comment. He's back online with us. Abhijit, we lost you for a moment mid-sentence. Yeah, go on, Abhijit.
So, this is now a cross-party problem, like Daniel was now saying. Now, we need to recognize two things. One is that Canada has a very severe extremism problem. The current Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is the granddaughter, the unapologetic granddaughter of a Nazi, not just a Nazi, a member of the SS Waffen. And if you remember the SS Waffen, the Holocaust was actually finished off in the space of 1 year. Most of the killing was done in that 1 year, primarily by the SS Waffen, by SS Waffen troops going and shooting Jews, and most of the SS Waffen troops were in fact local recruits, Ukrainians, Poles, etc., who went around shooting Jews. And her grandfather was part of this, ran a newspaper called Krakowski Visti, which used to put the target on Jews where the SS Waffen used to go shoot. They gave a standing ovation, just like this obituary today. They gave a standing ovation to actual SS Waffen Galitzen veteran, and not one of them had the brain to think, if he was fighting against the USSR, wasn't he fighting with the Nazis? Because there sure wasn't any Japanese planes or American planes or British planes dive bombing Soviet troops at that point of time. But they all stood up and clapped. Nobody has asked. And mind you, Chrystia Freeland is unapologetic about her Nazi past. She has never been held to account. We have seen extremely disturbing views come out about their views on Hamas and things like that. Lots of people from within the Labour Party. This is a systematic mainstreaming of radicalization, be it Khalistan, be it Nazis, be it Hamas, be it anything else. Second, Shiv, very quick point if you let me finish. We need to understand the Sikhs in Canada need our help. They are in the vicious clutches of organized crime-driven Khalistanis who control. Because, young boys plucked up from the middle of Ludhiana or Bhatinda or wherever, rural boys, have no social support systems there outside the Gurdwaras, which have been completely hijacked by these extremist radical groups. And they are encouraged by Trudeau because it's the same radical groups that bring out people to vote, forcibly vote, like in India, what used to happen in India, bust them out to vote and things like that for their vote banks. We need to break that up. And, cultural relativism, which is used to justify intra-Sikh violence in Canada, no longer works. They gave a standing ovation today, a minute of silence today, to a guy that supported the largest massacre of Canadians since the Second World War. Let that sink in. And they did it without any shame at all. We're not asking them to stop this for the sake of India. We're asking to stop this for the sake of Canada. But then when you have a deputy prime minister who's a Nazi and you give a standing ovation to a Nazi, this is essentially a quasi-Nazi state. There's nothing you can do about it.
This is an incredible situation, and I think you've captured it really well, Abhijit. What's happening in Canada and the political system there, which is clearly infiltrated by this absolutely diseased terrorist radical ecosystem. But the question remains, what can and what is and what should India be doing about it? Dr. Tara Karta, could you throw some light on that? Some actions have been taken, visible actions, actions that are obviously happening, not on camera and not in the media. What do you think India's next step, will or should be?
I think just before that, I just wanted to underline what Abhijit said. We are talking of the Canadian intelligence agencies have their reports. There's about 3,000 organized crime gangs in Canada. Linked to that is the fact that just after Nijjar was killed, Sukhdev Singh, nobody's talking about that. He was a criminal and he died. He was killed in an intergang fight. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. What we did was the National Investigation Agency brought out a detailed report on the extent of organized crime linked to the Lawrence Bishnoi gang, Goldie Brar, all those people. It's all there out in the open. Unlike what Canada has yet to give us any proof. I mean, at some point, I think the Conservatives leader also said that, look, he hasn't shared anything with us in terms of what is the proof that India was involved. Now, the last 3 arrests, or 3 or 4 arrests, which took place recently, I think it was last week, on this case, is all linked to the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. So, I mean, you shelter this bunch of people. I mean, forget about the Nazis. I mean, we can't forget. I mean, that is bad enough, giving a standing ovation to a Nazi. I mean, that at some level, I can't even understand what is going on.
It's symptomatic.
But to not act against organized crime in your own country doesn't make sense. So
there's
India, I think, has made its case very well. It has brought out the data. It's brought out that your National Investigation Agency has brought this out and said, this is what is going on. Now it's up to Canada to do something about it for its own sake, as Abhijit says.
Abhijit, I want to come to you on that. So we've seen what India has done, for most part. What lies ahead as far as Indian actions are concerned? I mean, the dossiers have been provided, the lists have been provided, action has been taken against, the consular services in places like Bhatinda and Ludhiana and Chandigarh and places like that. But what else can the Indian government do now, in your view?
So there's a lot of systematic things that you can do, because remember, these responses need to be graded in response to each and every provocation. I don't think standing up and giving a minute of silence counts as that grave a provocation per se, because that has to be action for action. But, one of the things is you cancel the PIO or OCI cards, whatever it is, of a lot of these chaps who do Khalistani activities. Incidentally, people don't realize this, but Jagmeet Singh used to keep coming very often to the Golden Temple here, and we used to let him come in spite of knowing what his credentials were. Why wasn't that stopped? Why are these OCI cards still given to these people? The third is there is about $56 billion worth of investment by the Canadian Pension Fund into India. Essentially, paying dividends out of that is subsidizing terrorism within Canada. That needs to be stopped, or we need to indicate that Canada needs to sell off that share. That is what I'd call a nuclear option.
Yes.
The third option here is also to prevent Indian students from going to Canada. I think there are a lot of countries which offer first-rate education. Sending them to Canada, especially to get into that morass of the housing crisis where, our students can't find a place to stay and things like that, is unfair on them. They should not be able to do that. Canadian universities should not be allowed to profit from Indians while targeting India through all this terror glorification. And might I add, Shiv, today they held a mock court where Narendra Modi's effigy was burnt, in much the same way that ISIS burnt that Jordanian pilot Muat al-Qasasbeh. He was burnt alive by throwing kerosene on him inside a jail cell. This was approved. There was an RCMP, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police guy, maybe a fake guy standing outside. But don't forget, the last time there was the Indira Gandhi assassination on a float, the RCMP actually took part in that float. This is actual state support for violent actions against India's past and current leaders.
So that makes it clear that it's not just a bunch of ragtag, radical groups. These are groups that are part of the system. These are groups that have infiltrated the system in Canada. It pervades the political class, and what we saw happen in Canadian Parliament is only a manifestation and a reminder that this isn't just about, gangsters or gun runners or Khalistani groups in Gurudwaras. This is much bigger than that. It's state policy, as Abhijit says, and it's a bigger problem than perhaps first imagined. We will keep reporting on this story, and we will continue to ask the questions on what India will be doing in response. Daniel, Dr. Tara and Abhijit, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with me on this important story.